So I want to welcome everybody to Psalm 139. And Ibn Ezra said of all the 150 Psalms, this is the Psalm that has the most to teach about the nature of God and our souls. And I'm delighted that our honoree this morning is my friend, Rabbi Kavod Weider, who will, after the half hour of teaching, talk a little bit about the psalm for him and share with us an original chant that he's composed for Psalm 139. Psalm 139 is like an impressionist painting, meaning when you step at a distance from it, it seems pretty clear what this psalm has to share, which is the omni of God. God who is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipowerful. And at the same time, the psalm is extraordinarily ambiguous up close. It's like that, that impressionist painting, and you get really close to it, you kind of see just kind of blotches of paint, and then it's clearer when you step at a distance. But up close, this psalm, even more than most, has unusual words and ambiguous phrases. And this is the nature of poetry. The ambiguity of phrases is often, I surmise, intentional to convey qualities of God. As I begin to share some of the thoughts about Psalm 139, I'm reminded of the title of a book by Jon Kabat-Zinn, published first in 1994, Wherever You Go, There You Are, subtitled Mindfulness, Meditation, Everyday Life. And Jon Kabat-Zinn, focusing on an individual, was essentially seeking to say that, you may try to get away from your problems, from those habits that are vexing you, but wherever you go, you bring it with you. That comes to mind, wherever you go, there you are, here as a title of this psalm, as we'll see particularly in verses 8 to 10. This is not about our mind, this is about God. And indeed, verses 8 to 10, with those famous lines, if I ascend to heaven, there you are. If I descend to Sheol, you are present. Those lines of God's omnipresence are incorporated into our traveler's prayer, the traditional traveler's prayer. I can't help but share, as I post this now, another example. I'm getting ahead. Normally I go back, but I just want to show you how a line can be read in two very different lines. I'll come back later to talk about verse 13, but I will add, this is the line. And again, my tendency in my translations is to translate literally. And then to explain it rather than, as many translators, to fill in the explanation. Literally, it's for you fashioned my kidneys, wove me in my mother's belly. And this notion of being woven in the belly, and you get the same word in verse 15, rukamti, knitted me in the depths of the earth. That is a unique image to this psalm, unique in all of Tanakh. God as knitting an individual into life. But I love, as I often share, how the ambiguity of a text can be used in very different ways. This particular verse has been cited by those in the LGBTQ community to say, this is who I am. So I was woven in my mother's belly. And it is also used in the Baptist community as part of something called the Psalm 139 Project, which was their seeking to put ultrasounds in pregnancy centers based on, let me show you what is in your mother's belly. So I'm going to start again at the top, but I do so from the very beginning, acknowledging that this psalm up close is remarkable in its artistry, of echoing words. The poetic term is merism, which is where you use opposites to convey all, walking and reclining, sitting and rising up. There are repeated merisms, the repeated sounds that get echoed, and the choice of words that appear nowhere else or are very obscure. For instance, the word golem, that great clay figure identified with Prague, that was the seed for Frankenstein. That word golem only appears once in Tanakh in this psalm. All right, with that, as kind of an overview, we begin. And the title taken from the psalm comes both in the beginning and then reframed, and I take it from the second to last line. Examine me, El, and know my heart. For the conductor, for David, a psalm. Adonai, you have examined me, and you know. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You discern my thoughts from afar. My walking and my reclining you measure, and with all my ways you are familiar. When there is not a word on my tongue, surely, Adonai, you know all of it. Back and front, you encompass me and place upon me your palm. Wondrous is such knowledge for me. High above, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or from before your face could I flee? If I ascend to heaven, there you are. If I descend to Sheol, you are present. If I raise wing with dawn and dwell in the furthest part of the sea, even there your hand would lead me, and you would grasp me with your right. And if I say, surely darkness will envelop me, and let night be light for me. Even darkness is not too dark for you, and night as the day illumines, as darkness is as the light. For you fashioned my kidneys and wove me in my mother's belly. I thank you, for awesomely I am set apart. Wondrous are your works, and my soul knows it very intimately. Not concealed was my essence from you when I was made in secret and knitted in the depths of earth. My unformed mass, my galmi, was seen by your eyes, and in your book they were all written, days to be fashioned to God, one of them, and to me. How dear are thoughts of you, El, how essential their beginnings. I count them. Compared to sand, they are greater. I end, and I am still with you. If you would slay God the wicked, shedders of blood, turn away from me, who rebel against you by scheming, lifting themselves up falsely, your enemies. Behold, those who cause hatred of you, Adonai, I hate. Those who rise up against you, I loathe. With utmost hatred, I hate them. For enemies they have become to me. Examine me, El, and know my heart. Probe me, and know my troubled thoughts. And see if a way of vexation is in me, and lead me on the way everlasting. Now, the first thing to point out is there's such assuredness here. It's this reflective psalm in which God's wonder and power is conveyed. And in the beginning, it's this acknowledgement of how, you've examined me and you know me. In verse 1, there's that sense of assuredness And yet, as it leads to its end, there is that same line repeated, but here in a very different way. Examine me, El, and know my heart. Probe me and know my troubled thoughts. Which is to say, here there's at the end this examine me to know that I am sincere, as if that's a question, and know that I am troubled. Here's an example of a word. This word here, sarapai, the last word of verse 23. It only really appears twice in all of Tanakh. It appears here and in one other psalm, Psalm 94, verse 19. Barav sarapi bekarbi tenchumecha, yesha'asha'u nafshi. With so many of my troubles within me, you comforted, soothing my spirit. And so this rare word, and it's only one example of a number of rare words and unusually double entendre phrases throughout, sarapai, there's this quality of the psalmist acknowledging God's presence and yet also being self-reflective, a need to acknowledge that he himself is not like God. He is troubled and wants to reassure God that your enemies are my enemies. Be there for me. Lead me on the way everlasting. I need you, you who are the knower of all. One other piece of artistry, and I keep one eye on the clock as it's a longer psalm and there's so much to share, but I seek when I share these psalms to highlight the artistry of the psalm. Look, for instance, at this reoccurring sound, and this reoccurring sound of kind of a root of cha, ra, ah. So look here, verse 2, me rachok, verse 3, ar chi, verse 5, achor, verse 7, me ruchecha, and then the last word, evrach, verse 9, acharit. So you get this reoccurring sound in each of these words. In this case, most of the words have a different meaning, but that's part of the echoing of this sound, this ra-ha-ah. And a sense, again, of this dual quality of the psalm conveying simultaneously security of God's ever-present reaching out God's right hand to lead us in darkness, and the sense of I am in darkness, with the kind of anxiety that evokes. And so there is this seesawing when the psalm is looked at very closely. The psalm structure is usually identified as 4 sections, 6 verses each. So let's look at these as units. For the conductor, for David, a psalm, Adonai, you have examined me and you know my sitting down, my rising up, you discern my thoughts from afar, my walking and my reclining you measure, and with all my ways you are familiar. When there is not a word on my tongue, surely, Adonai, you know all of it. Back and front you encompass me, and place upon me your palm. Wondrous is such knowledge for me. High above, I cannot attain it. So unit 1, this first of 4 sections, is a ode to God's protective knowledge and presence. And now let me show you some of the ambiguity up front of how you would translate this. Verse 2, you know, and the word know appears 7 times in this psalm. That's the key motif, yada. And the word yada in Hebrew is more than an intellectual knowing. It's like Adam Yada et Chava Ishto, Adam knew Eve, his wife. There's a quality of intimacy. And so the reoccurring word, it's in verse 1, you know. Verse 2, Yadata, you know, is that God has a quality of knowing us intimately in our rising and our going. And that has an echo of the Shema. That, when you shall repeat these words in your sitting down and your rising up. And that probably is also intentional because the Shema was second nature to a psalmist. There's that quality of you are with me as I am called to be with you. You discern my thoughts from afar. And here, livrei, that word, can be understood in different ways. It can be understood as thought, which is the way that Ibn Ezra and Radak understand it, but Rashi will understand it not as ra'ayon, thought, but as re'ah, friend, which is, as Rashi would translate verse 2, your understanding befriends me. And you get that same word back to the artistry of the weave. You will get that word reappearing in verse 17. V'li ma yakru echa el, and to me how dear are thoughts of you. And the same commentators will stay consistent. So Rashi will be, and to me how dear are your friendship of you. And so a word like re'echa, a key motif, you discern my thoughts, can also be you befriend, your understanding befriends me. So there's going to be more of these examples than I'll have time to share because they're replete throughout this psalm, these double entendres of thought and friendship. And surely both are suggested and thought. The words are often obscure. So verse 2 deals with home, sitting down and rising up. Verse 3, back, it's like the Shema has, the walking on the way. And now it's, if you will, walking, you're on the way. But you take a word here like zerita, the third word of verse 3. I translated as my measure. Rashi will see it as related to crown. You crown me, which means you protect me. Exodus 25:11 uses this obscure word, zar. It's also used as a word to be the winnowing of grain, which is where the word measure, winnowing of grain for zerita, my walking and my reclining you measure. With all my ways you are hiskanta, another obscure word, hiskanta. Numbers 22:30 also uses it for being accustomed, hence are familiar. When there is not a word on my tongue, surely Adonai, you know all of it. Here too, kind of an up close, the grammar, the Hebrew, it's not clear what is being referred to. It seems to be even before I speak, when there's not a word on my tongue, my thoughts are still forming. You, God, already know all of what I'm going to say. Now, again, this will raise a challenge, and that is how much in life is predetermined. 1. 2, how much does God know? Though I will link this to Jeremiah 1:5. B'terem atzrecha bevetin yedaticha. Even before I was fashioned in the womb, you knew me. There's this, that's Jeremiah, this poetic sensibility. Back and forth, you encompass me and place upon me your palm. Back and front can mean physically, you surround me. It can also be tsartani, can be encompass. It can be formed, meaning this is how you fashioned me, all of me, you formed it. And that's how Radak will understand it. And Robert Alter, he'll choose to also translate this as you formed me rather than encompass me, because he likes the image of God as potter who will fashion. So the word tsar in verse 5, another example of ambiguity of terms, can be tsura, which is form or fashion. That's how Radak understands it. Rashi and Targum will understand it from tsar, which is to constrain me, to make narrow. Or it can be which can be understood as either protect or control. Either. And you can choose the valence of what it means to be in a tsar with God being around you. It can also be understood back and front, you encompass me, as not just on a physical plane, but on a temporal plane, meaning past and future, you encompass me. Place upon me your palm. And again, your palm can be protective, it can be controlling. You can choose how you want to relate, and both can, of course, be simultaneously true. Verse 6, wondrous is such knowledge for me, high above, I cannot attain it. That, of course, is an echo to other lines in sacred text, in Isaiah, for instance, about God's knowledge is not our knowledge. Statement of wonder about God. Though the word pili'ah is understood as, by some, concealed. So that's how Rashi understands it. Concealed is such knowledge for me. So you can emphasize back to two dimensions. Either it's wondrous, it creates a sense of wow, or it's simply beyond me. Both are contained in verse 6, up close. And now the second set of 6 verses. And now these verses that are among the best known, because they're part of our prayers. And I'll add, in the Reformed community in America, this psalm is read as part of Ne'ilah. And that's as we emerge from Yom Kippur, the sense that God will ever be with us. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where from before your face could I flee? Rashi, already in the 11th century, regarding that first part, would say, where can I go from your spirit? Because I am only alive because of the Ruach, the spirit you have placed within me. So I am just dead matter without you, is how he understands it. Where can I go from your spirit, or where from before your face could I flee? Often translated from before your presence. If I ascend to heaven, there you are. If I descend to Sheol, you are present. So this is verse 7. Verse 8 is vertical. The heights is heaven. Sheol, the netherworld, that's the lowest point. And hinecha is like the word hineni, meaning fully present. That's, the response of Abraham to God. Hineni, I am here. If I raise wing with dawn and dwell in the furthest part of the sea, here, again, obscure a bit in terms of the Hebrew. Robert Alter will note that there's a common myth, universal myth, of dawn having wings that may be suggested here if I raise wing with dawn. Rashi and Ibn Ezra identify this image, verse 9, with as the rays of dawn spread forth, they could be seen as shimmering wings. It's kind of a nice image. If I raise wing with dawn and dwell in the farthest parts of the sea, even there you would lead me. And this word here, lead me, verse 10, will reappear in that last verse, in the last three words. Here, in verse 24, you get the same word, uncheni. Here, it's clearly positive. And see if a way of vexation is in me, and lead me on the way everlasting. But here in verse 10, the first time the word appears, it's not clear. Again, there's this double entendre. Even there, your hand would lead me could mean control me. And you would grasp me with your right hand. So here in verse 10, there's ambiguity of the word tinchemi, leading me. But where the trajectory of the psalm goes will be to use that word in a positive way. Verse 11, and if I say, surely darkness will envelop me and let not be light for me, even darkness is not too dark for you. And night as the day illumines as darkness is as the light. The Hebrew here is also a bit ambiguous. And I pause on verses 11 and 12 because I keep one eye on the clock and I only have 5 more minutes. And I know that this image is an image that Rabbi Wieder, my friend Kavod, will share as part of the pull of this psalm, that even in darkness, there is light, and the light can be understood as God's presence. Remember, this was a psalm of David. That's what this unit of psalms has in common. As we started yesterday, 138 to 135 are for David. And in the Talmud, Pesachim 2b, it will refer in the Talmud to this verse, and it will say, this is David speaking, surely darkness will envelop me, and darkness is the troubles of this life. And let night, this life's troubles, be light for me, have your illumination. So the Talmud will, and I'm looking again on my screen at Rabbi Wieder, will pick up on this image, though it will concretize darkness as the sordidness, the conflictedness of the daily realities in which we live, with God's presence being a source of light. The mid-word of the entire psalm, and you know I often look to the middle word as the bullseye. What is the essence of the psalm is the first word of Psalm 14, Odecha, I thank you. Also can be translated as I praise you, I acclaim you. For awesomely I am set apart. Now the word set apart echoes the next word, Niflaim ma'asecha, wondrous are your works. Robert Alter will point out that wondrous has an aleph in it. Nifleti, the fifth word in verse 14, has no aleph. So it's often translated as, I thank you for wondrous or awesomely is my wonder. But he would say there's no aleph, and therefore it's to be understood as being set apart or different. And Benjamin Siegel will choose to be guided by Robert Alter, and that's good company for me. So I thank you for awesomely I am set apart. And again, ambiguity, either set apart from the rest of creation, for I uniquely, as a human, can appreciate the wonder of your community, your creation, or it can be understood as set apart from you, God. Only you uniquely can understand intimately my soul, can understand the wonder of your creation. Here too, verse 15, not concealed was atzmi mimeka. I choose to translate it as my essence, in part, and that's the etzem, is the essence of a matter. Targum will understand it as physical structure. It's often translated as my skeleton. So, and verse 16, galmi, the word golem, which will become such a popular word in folk tradition, is translated as my unformed mass was seen by your eyes. And there is this use of this word golem in the Talmud in describing the 24 hours of the creation on the sixth day, and how in Sanhedrin 38b, on the second hour, the earth was gathered from the four corners to form the mass, the golem of man, of a human being. And to me, how dear are thoughts of you, El, how essential. And here's the other word, and why I chose to translate it as essential, because that's that word etzem, verse 17 again. How essential their beginnings. There is much more to say about this psalm, but I'm now in overtime. And so I must stop short, because I want to create some room for my friend, Rabbi Wieder. But I will say just a closing word about the trajectory. Where it leads to is those last 6 and the last verses shift. And that is, who rebel against you by scheming, lifting themselves up falsely, or swearing falsely, your enemies. Behold, those who cause hatred of you, Adonai, I hate. Those who rise up against you, I loathe. And it's saying, it's not that they're creating problems for me. They're creating problems for you. And I love you as you love me. I will fight for you as I know you protect me. And therefore, with utmost hatred, I hate them for enemies. They who hate you, they have become to me enemies. And yet, the last 2 lines, he returns to the opening. Chakreni El v'dalivavi. Examine me, El, and know my heart. And here it's, in the first presentation, you have already examined me. Now he's saying, examine me again. Know that I am sincere in my seeking relationship with you to fight your enemies. Probe me and know my troubled thoughts. I pointed at the very beginning to the word sarapai as a word that only appears here and in one other place in Psalms and nowhere else in the Tanakh. And here we're given a window into the prompt for this self-reflection. There is internally trouble. So as I open, let me close. The word sarapai in Ezekiel, a word that sounds like it, but it's not that word exactly. Ezekiel 31:5, V'tarbina sarapativ. And it will be pointed out by Radak that it's in Ezekiel, that means, and its branches multiplied, which is to say, sarapai are thoughts that grow out of something else. They're the branches of the tree. So there's a word I will now enter into my Hebrew vocabulary. Sarapai are thoughts run amok. They're all the tentacles, all the branches that come out of the core. And probe me and know my, this swirling of thoughts. and see if a way of vexation, otsev, can be understood as idolatry. It can be understood as sadness. And there will be the comment that idolatry makes God sad. And lead me on the way everlasting. And we talked already about the reappearance of the word and lead me. There's a sense of God who has such knowledge, is the source of knowledge, will enable me to quell, to quiet, and to go forward feeling God's care and protection. So I said this is an impressionist painting. At a distance, this is a psalm of comfort. This is a psalm that says, God, you are ever present. You are Re'echa. You are my friend. You are the one who knows my thoughts, both embedded in the same word. And yet, hinted at is as the psalmist writes it, the psalmist knows from the taste of darkness. The psalmist knows from thoughts run amok. The psalmist turns to God as the caring, guiding presence. And with that, my friend, Rabbi Kavod Weider, for some reactions to our study this morning of Psalm 139, and then to share us your original chant.
Thank you, Rabbi Spitz. One of the things that inspires me so much about you as a rabbi is that you are on your own ongoing learning journey, whether it's, and you take it on as big projects, whether it's Daf Yomi or whether it's Zohar or now the Psalms, to really deepen your own learning and connection with the tradition. And then you invite all of us along with you and share. And that's such a blessing and inspiring for me. I also really appreciate in what you shared and how you teach is that you really, by giving so many different interpretations of the Hebrew, of verses from all different places, from scholars to rabbis, really show open that the text is very flexible, that Hebrew can have can go in a lot of different directions. And really the meaning that we get from the text has everything to do also with the translator and what the translator is, what's the Torah that's coming through from the text, from the translators. I appreciated in this last bit of time, all of these different possible entryways in, and it was really interesting to reflect upon my own relationship to this psalm over time, and noticing how that has evolved and changed. So I just want to share a couple of thoughts about that. If you don't mind putting the text back on the screen and starting with verse 7. I'm going to mostly focus on the chant that I'm going to share is verse 12, but I really feel like it really starts leading up to it in a big way on verse 7, which is this idea of God as ever present. And for me, this idea of God as ever present is more than an idea. It's something that is consistently transforming and challenging me in every moment of my life. And I want to say right here, I'm just very aware that whenever we are talking about God, we bring all kinds of thoughts and concepts to that. And I come back to the Rambam over and over again, who really says anytime, and this is a radical statement, that you have a thought about who God is, that is idolatry. Because as soon as you have a thought, you are fixing it into a boundary, whether you make that boundary very abstract and expansive, or whether you make it narrow, it's still a boundary. And when you're talking about the infinite mystery, there is no boundary. So that has kind of freed up me for being able to open to my own experience. And one of the things that has come to light in my own meditation practice has been this sense of presence. And when we talk about our own presence and we talk about God's ever presence, I don't see a whole lot of difference there, the more that I notice. So if I pay attention to my experience in a moment, I can watch the thoughts as they arise. I can notice my breath. I can notice sensations in my body. But when I start to reflect on who is it that's watching, who is it that is seeing, who is it that's noticing, that question is not a question for my mind to answer, but more for me to sense into, to feel into. It's a question that's pointing me to my own presence with my experience. And I can see this when somebody is talking to me and looking in my eyes, I feel their presence with me. And what I'm really sensing is that sense of presence that is independent from thought, that is independent from, that is the presence that these verses are starting to connect for me. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I go from your face? Could I flee? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. It's a way of saying, you know, my own consciousness, my own awareness is with me all the time. I've been the one that's noticing my life from day one all the way through. Who is it that's noticing? Could that be God's ever presence? And then it takes that idea of God is not something that's far from you, but something that's so close to you, even your tongue. It's my very awareness. So starting to begin to sense of God's ever presence as my own awareness, my own presence, we come to verse 11 and 12, if you could move for there. So, you know, so this verse 12, it can be translated in a lot of different ways, but Gam choshech lo yachshiv mimecha, the way that I read it is, even the darkness is not dark to you. Meaning, from the perspective of God, from the perspective of pure awareness, all of phenomenon that is unfolding is part of the energy of life, is part of the aliveness of the world, is expressions of the one. And when we say in our prayers, Ein Od, I choose to not interpret that as there is no other, as is there is no other God than among the many gods. There's no other God than our God, Adonai. But I translate Ein Od as there is nothing else. Everything is part of this creative unfolding energy. So I may experience things in my life that are painful. I may experience things in my life that are dark. But from the perspective of God, or from the perspective of awareness, it's not dark. It just is. It just is. And I can judge that all that I want in my mind, and the judgment that I bring to it is important, because there's lots of ways in which we need to act to illumine darkness. But on this deeper level, from a perspective of deeper awareness, dark is not dark, it's just God. V'layla kayom ya'ir kakshecha ka'ora, and the night is as the day, right? It's what the Zohar will call a lamp of darkness. And I love that idea of thinking a lamp of darkness, whatever we are experiencing, no matter how painful, is radiating energy, is radiating light. It's our perspective that makes it dark. And again, that doesn't mean that we have to kind of accept, oh, it's all God. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to act. I don't need to, but there's a way of saying, when I relate to my experience, even if it's painful and dark, as a way to be with it as it is, I bring that sense of presence and awareness that is not as reactive, that's able to be more thoughtful, is able to listen deeper, and is able to engage and try to understand a little bit more about what is needed. So this is the chant that goes along. This is verse 12. I'll do it, a couple times through, and I really invite you to join me. Once you hear it and you get a sense of it, feel how the melody radiates, and these ideas radiate in your own being. We're all in our own little house in our Zoom bubbles, and we're muted, so nobody has to hear you. It's just us, but you can sing along with me. Gam choshech lo yashich mimecha. Gam choshech lo yakshich mimecha. Velayla kayom ya'ir kakshecha ka'ora. Velayla kayom ya'ir kakshecha ka'ora. Try it. Gam choshech lo yakshich mimecha. Gam choshech lo yakshich mimecha. Velayla kayom ya'ir kakshecha ka'ora. Velayla kayom ya'ir kakshecha ka'ora. One more time. Gam choshech lo yakshich mimecha. Gam choshech lo yakshich mimecha. Velayla kayom ya'ir kakshecha ka'ora. Velayla kayom ya'ir kakshecha ka'ora. Let's just take a moment just to sit with that. And as you pay attention to the vibration in the body created by the chant or your own breath, or the feeling of your body in space, just begin to sense your own presence, the one that is watching, the one that is noticing, the one that is choosing to be here. And consider that this presence is an expression of the ever-presence. Thank you. You're muted, Rabbi.
That was illuminating and beautiful, both in teaching and with verse 12's chanting. Rabbi Wieder is the rabbi of Temple Beth El in Laguna Niguel here in Orange County, and he partners with Cantor Shula. And I saw, Shula Kalir Merton, that you had said you wanted to have a closing thought about Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. So this is Temple Beth El time. Go ahead, closing brief comment, and then I'll pull it together and we'll say Kaddish.
Yes, I really would love to share this, because when I read this particular psalm last night, somehow the word that came into my head is, this is a love letter. This clearly is a love letter. And the reason I thought so, and it wasn't clear in my head yet exactly, was that the phrase, he can read the end of each sentence of mine. He can read all my thoughts. And wherever I look, there. So just as you were talking, it came to me why this was so familiar. I had been singing in concerts of Yiddish songs that I've been doing over the years, a beautiful art song based on text by Rabbi Yitzchak Levi Miberdichev called Adudale. Adudale is a Yiddish word that means a love letter. Du means you in Yiddish, as you know. Adudale, a you. And in it, the words are exactly based. Now I know where he got it. I used to think he was so brilliant, but he is brilliant. But he got it here. He says, wherever I go, where do I find you? This is where you are. Heaven, you. Earth, you. Tzafon, north, south, east, west. When something is good, you. When something is bad, and the lyric does say the word oi. When something is bad, oi, you are there too, you know. And so it goes. And at the end, it says, wherever I am, you are. You know me. And that is Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Miberdichev completely basing himself on this song.
Mm. Well, thank you, Shula. And it's always moving to know how words of thousands of years ago have rippled forward in terms of Levi Yitzchak in Ukraine, the 19th century Hasidic master, and how that rippled forward into a Yiddish song. And I close with what you gave me, the reminder, Kavod, of that God is a lamp of darkness, God's presence, and that paradox of being present in the presence of the ever-present is a gift as well. Thank you each. Next week, next Thursday, we will have a special guest. So once a week, roughly, a special guest. That'll be Rabbi Eddie Feinstein. And that will be a week from today with that famous Psalm 137 about by the rivers of Babylon that ends with throwing children against rocks. And it's that last part that I'm going to have him elucidate. It's shocking, and I was unaware that it was shocking until he mentioned it to me. So next week we will be meeting Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And as today, Kavod, you helped culminate the work by going deeper, and I so thank you.